What if healing isn't about filling the gap, but learning to live with it? Can words reveal truths you didn't know you were hiding from yourself? What if your deepest desire wasn't actually yours? Why do we chase people who can't give us what we want? Is love really about the other person or about something missing inside us? Welcome to Session and Secrets.
We're going to take it further than just being satisfied.
Pain and the suffering.
Now I get to experience something new.
Listen to yourself, right? What you're not saying. And then just explore, go with it, be curious about it.
Dream, we're being attacked by a bunch of men who are wearing black suits.
Chase people who can't give us what we want.
You're kind of just lacking and we have the answer. And once you have the answer, you'll feel better.
And to answer this and other questions, I'm here with my guest, Evans Wittenberg. Welcome, Evans.
Thank you, Louisa.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a therapist and candidate Lacanian psychoanalyst in Los Angeles. I see individuals, couples, teens, some in a traditional psychotherapy format, but increasingly more and more in Lacanian psychoanalysis.
So, Evans, our desires are never quite what they seem. Yeah. What does that mean for the way we love, suffer, and change?
Well, we're really strange creatures, aren't we? I mean, we want things, we desire things so far beyond a mere satisfaction of some kind of a need or instinctual gratification, right? Why is this true? What is it that really motivates us to want things so deeply? And I think the psychoanalytic explanation is that we kind of invest objects or people with things, with something. It's as if there's something kind of mysterious, there's something shiny, there's something enigmatic, there's some secret that is inside, that is contained within or behind the things that we really, really want in life. And in psychoanalysis, we're going to say that what that secret is, it's nothing we can really name. It's unconscious, but what that secret really is it's the belief that these things will give us a sense of completion, that they will make us feel whole. And think about it on a really simple level. I love to run. I got to buy a new pair of running shoes every now and then. And, I do my research. I figure, okay, here's the new shoe to get. And I get really excited. And I'm imagining myself wearing those shoes. And I'm thinking, then I'll be a real runner. Okay, maybe I don't take it that far, but you get the point. You kind of envision yourself with this object or with this person, perhaps. And you envision a sense of completeness. But we've all experienced, you get that package and you rip it open. And what do you see? You just see some foam and fabric. You see the shoes. And so there's this kind of disappointing or tragic dimension to desire. We want these things far beyond the simple need of satisfaction. And then we get them and then we're kind of let down. Wait a second, I got this thing I really wanted, but I'm still not, and maybe a lot of good things happen for you, but I still haven't discovered the sense of completion. Now, I know that sounds tragic, but on the other hand, this is what makes life really worth living, right? I mean, this is what really animates us and brings us joy and satisfaction in life, is pursuing things with this kind of beyond, right? We're going to take it further than just being satisfied. Now, when we think about it in terms of love and in terms of relationships, it gets really, really interesting. We don't just fall in love with a person. We fall in love with this thing that they seem to represent. We fall in love with this thing that is beyond them, this thing that is more than them. And again, it's that sense that if we're with that person, if we obtain that person, if we have that person in our lives, that we'll somehow be whole. And maybe we won't have problems anymore, or we'll just feel more complete. But as I know we both know from working with couples and working with people who struggle with their love life, that inevitably what happens is you get to a point in a relationship where, the person is actually not the shiny thing that you imbued them with. The person is actually a person. And it's a big moment for a lot of people. And for a lot of people who come to therapy or analysis, or couples who might be struggling with something like this, there's a loss. Oh my God, this person who I thought was the perfect person for me, or the most beautiful person in the world, or whatever, or I was really seduced by them for XYZ reasons, they turn out to actually just be a real person. And now I'm faced with this kind of sense of loss. Like, what do I do? Does that mean that there's an even more real person, a better person out there? Do I have to break up with this person and go find somebody else? And so it produces this sense of suffering. But a change can occur. And I think this is really a big part of the goal of psychoanalysis. The change is that when we confront that moment where there is that sense of loss, that we haven't obtained the ideal, the thing that will make us whole, that we're actually exposed to something very new and very novel. And maybe the difference can be we can say to ourselves, like, thank God, I've finally broken out of this fantasy frame that I keep repeating over and over again, chasing the same thing with the same results. Now I get to experience something new. And in that field of newness, that's where new desire comes in.
And that sense of completion is really hard to get. So how do we prevent from going, from one to the next one? The fear of missing out,
Yeah.
right? How does that?
Yeah. Well, I think in terms, psychoanalysts would say, certainly Lacan and Freud would say, it's impossible. You actually will never get it. You might get things that just sort of temporarily stand in for it, but eventually, inevitably, you will still feel that same loss. And part of the working through of this dilemma is having to kind of confront this. I mean, for instance, Elon Musk does not need another $1 billion, right? And yet he still goes about acting as if that was the most important thing in the world for him to attain. So I think you're right, it's not only is it hard, it's actually impossible. And there has to be a confrontation with that impossibility. And I know that sounds kind of like this devastating thing, like, oh my God,
Yeah.
well, if then is there any meaning left or anything like that? But actually, I think what happens is very, very different. I think what you get is a sense of newness. I think you actually get something that you weren't able to possibly, have conceived of happening in your life. And I think that's what almost can return us to a sort of childlike state of desiring. And I think that's a big aim of psychoanalysis.
How do you go from feeling the pain and the suffering and maybe hopelessness, right?
Yeah,
Of that to desire and to having that
yeah,
childlike.
yeah. Well, you invest yourself in psychoanalysis. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think psychoanalysis is the only
Right.
kind of discourse that is sort of around this. I think I'd be the wrong person to talk to about this, but I've often heard that there are certain parts of Buddhism that approach this in kind of similar fashions. But it's not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. And I think one thing that does have to happen is that you do have to experience yourself beyond who you think you are. And that is something that psychoanalysis really facilitates, because you focus a great deal on dreams. You focus a lot on these moments when your speech doesn't add up, or you have a slip of the tongue, you say something you don't intend to say. You try to speak, but nothing comes out. That for us is the unconscious. Those are manifestations of the unconscious. And the more that we put our attention to the unconscious, the more we realize that there is a desire there. There is a desire there that is beyond what society or culture might expect of us. It's something novel, and it's something very singular to who we are. And there is immense freedom found there.
So how does how is the unconscious like a language? How is it structured like a
Great
language?
question. This is probably Lacan's most famous uh, um, expression. And all of Lacan's lines are extremely cryptic, and they're kind of designed to really get you to sort of wrestle with them and think. The really important part of that line is like. It's not that the unconscious is a language, but it's like a language. And this will give some context to the listeners. So, Freud, when he wrote The Interpretation of Dreams over 125 years ago at this point, he said, like, look, you know, we can't say that like this image in a dream means this or this means that because it's all totally subjective, right? There's no way to make a dictionary of what dream images mean. But what seems really apparent is that there's kind of like these processes at work in dreams. And he distinguished these two processes. One he called condensation, the other one he called displacement. Condensation, you can take as metaphor. We all know this, right? So, like, we have a dream, and then we say in a dream, we're being attacked by a bunch of men who are wearing black suits. So, metaphor says, oh, maybe the black suits for me, because I had this dream, let's say the black suits represent um, the corporate environment where I work, or kind of maybe some aspect of patriarchy and what it wants from me, and they're attacking me and they're limiting my desire. So that would be a metaphor. But displacement, what Lacan will later call metonymy, is a little bit different. In metonymy or displacement, what happens is you've got suit. Okay, so you've got these men in black suits. They're attacking me. Oh, yeah, I'm really worried about a lawsuit. So they're two different linguistic kind of maneuvers or processes. And the real brilliance of Lacan was to recognize he was a psychoanalyst and studied extensively in Freud, but he was also really a philosopher and incredibly well read. And he was following very closely what was happening in structural linguistics in the early half of the 20th century and said, oh my God, metaphor and metonymy are the same as displacement and condensation. They're the same thing. So therefore, I'm going to start thinking about the unconscious a little differently. It's not going to be this kind of more Jungian sort of reservoir of like images. The unconscious, there's something linguistic about it. And if we follow language, we can get to the unconscious. And then you have the elaboration of Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Okay. And so language does have a meaning, right? What is that you're saying that whatever we I would say we understand, like, our perception is
Mhm.
based on language, right? And it's based on cultural experiences
Sure.
too, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Like the way we were raised, or right? Because I mean, my first language is Spanish, right? And so
Yeah.
some languages have a
Yeah.
lot different meaning when you say it in English than when you say it in Spanish, right?
Precise,
And so
precisely. For Lacan, mother tongue is almost essential
yes,
to the work. And for him, it's actually kind of difficult to be an analyst to someone whose mother tongue you don't necessarily share, although not impossible and not something he did do from time to time. But the importance of I think what's important about language here is that for Lacan, it's not as if words, what he was going to call signifiers, are specifically tied to things. They're only tied to other words. So, for instance, you say tree. Well, classically, we might think, okay, the word tree represents a tree. But if we follow it linguistically, say, okay, well, a tree, it's got a trunk and it has bark on it and it has leaves on it. And think about this as almost the course of therapy. It's like somebody says a word over and over again. You hear this word repeat. Well, you might ask that word back to them and see where that goes. And you might find it opens up a whole new field of new speech that becomes available. And that's very much so the art of psychoanalysis. Is how do we help people speak to things they've been totally unable to speak about before? Traumas they've been totally unable to speak about before. Experiences that have no words for them, that they only experiences like something maybe somatic or lodged within the body somehow.
yes. What can you tell me a little bit about, like, how we think that how our desires maybe are based on others' desires?
That's such a good question. So there's this idea, there's this concept in psychoanalysis called the other, and I'm going to try not to go into it too much because it can get really theoretical and abstract. But when we write it down, we put a capital O on it, or we can call it the big other. So think about it this way: like when you're born, you're a baby, you have these others in your life. You have your parents, and your parents they kind of tell you you know, how to live, what to believe in a little bit, what to do, what not to do. You get some rules for the game. You get a bit older and then you start to wonder, well, where do those rules come from? Okay, well, those rules come from their parents. They come from culture. They come from one's heritage, one's ethnicity. They come from many, many different places. That's what we might call the big other. You can throw a lot into it. You can throw culture, you can throw religion, you can throw society in it. But the important thing about the big other is that the big other is it's like the rules to the game. So you open a board game and you take out that little booklet and you go through it and it tells you sort of what you can and can't do on that board game. So it tells you what to desire. For instance, let's say in American culture, what do we desire here? Well, we desire, money, success, wealth, this kind of image of individualism, that sort of thing. So those are objects that already exist, and society says, here they are. And we say, oh, good, I'm going to focus my desire towards those. Consumerism, capitalism exploits this very, very heavily, right? It puts things in front of all our faces all the time and tells us that we should want them. So that's a little bit of an example of kind of how we're sort of given, the other sort of gives us things to want.
How do we become conscious? I mean, how do we know or identify? I don't know how to break. Can you break from desiring what you desire versus what the other desires? What do you think?
I in a way, that's something that everybody has to come to terms, has to figure out. That's a sort of knot that everybody has to untangle in their own unique way. I think part of it is coming to the realization that it's not about finding the right thing, right? It's not about finding the perfect career. It's not about finding the perfect person. That these are all just sort of stand-ins. But what does happen is because we are told to want certain things, that we end up having to limit this other voice within us, the voice of the unconscious. We're told that certain things are not okay to do, not okay to think, not okay to say. And of course, this results in all kinds of, psychological symptoms, right? And so part of the process is simply being able to begin to speak to these things that have been, well, repressed. And in doing so, we can find some liberation, at least from the kind of psychological effects of that repression. But in terms of whether or not we act, some do. Some do. Some are able to act beyond. And maybe it's a good thing and maybe it's a terrible thing. Maybe an act of terrorism, right? Or something horrific like that is a way to act beyond the demands of the other. Or an incredible act of generosity, an incredible act of self-sacrifice. So there are ways to do it, right? But it's not so simple as being able to say, oh, I just need to pick a different lifestyle.
Right. And so, what about when you desire something, right?
Yeah.
How do you, or even like what you said, repress? What, if I'm repressing something,
Yeah.
how do I know what I'm repressing if I'm not even aware of it?
You listen for the unconscious, right? So dreams are a fantastic example. They tell us all the time about the things that we're repressing constantly. And I always recommend when I begin working with people, even in just a psychotherapy frame, to bring in dreams. And it takes no great skill or talent to begin dream work. What's important is the patient or the client's associations. What does this mean to you? What does that mean to you? Right? And what comes of that? And as that process enriches and kind of ferments in the container of the therapy or the analysis, people easily say, oh, okay, well, actually, they begin to speaking to this. Actually, I am quite angry. I am really angry about what happened, even though I grew up in an environment where it was not okay to be angry at all. So that's certainly one way to do it. Another way is through our speech, of course, through moments of little breaks, interruptions, the way we interrupt ourselves, the way we cut ourselves off from saying, oh, why did I cut myself off from saying that? What was I trying to conceal? What was I trying to repress? Did I think I was going too far, saying something wrong, saying something I might be criticized for?
But how does that stop us from, saying mean things or saying hurtful things to other people?
Mm. Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily the goal to somehow be able to not care, right? It's that I don't think that's the sort of mission, right? Is to be able to somehow just not care about other people and what other people want. I think maybe it's important for all of us to come to that point, though, come to that intersection where we feel maybe we have the capacity to get the thing, to go after at least the things that we want, and really have a good understanding and a knowledge of when it might not intercede on other people. But I think there's a big difference between that coming to that point and then simply living as if there was some life that was out there that we should have had or was better for us, right?
Right. Like, yes, like I think you're saying like pause, listen to yourself, right? What you're not saying, and then just explore, go with it, be curious about it.
Yeah, yeah. Be curious about it.
About
Absolutely.
that can be I think that can be a little challenging because if you're curious, you're sitting with emotions, right? Or you're sitting with maybe
Yeah,
something that is uncomfortable.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
So how do you help people do that?
I think it's in some ways the setup is typical of any kind of therapy, right? You have absolute privacy. So when you sort of know that you're not necessarily being judged for what you're going to say, you gain the capacity to speak a little more. Now, however, there's always an assumption that you're going to be judged, and that's where the real, I think, brilliance of certainly not just analysis, but many forms of therapy come into play. Is being able to work through the patient's kind of expectations of what their therapist analyst might think of them. And so the transference, as we call that, is a big part of Lacanian psychoanalysis. The difference of it in Lacanian psychoanalysis is we look at the transference a little bit differently. It's not so much just about, oh, do I remind you of some sort of figure in your life? Transference is more like, do you need me to know the answer? Are you coming to me because you believe that I hold the secret for you? And the art of the work, and it's not easy and it takes time, but the art of the work is for the person to then realize that actually myself as the analyst, I don't have the key for you. I don't have the big secret, the big reveal for you. And what you do with that is yours to do with.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how so tell me like about the lack. How is that central to human experience?
Well, lack, I think the important thing to understand about lack is that lack isn't necessarily like depression or sadness or not feeling good enough. Or, I mean, it could be, it certainly could be, maybe often is. But lack is just something uh, essentially human. We're not complete, right? And lack is part of that. Lack is part of what it means to be a human. But lack is also synonymous with desire, because if you don't have lack, you don't have desire. If you have all your needs fulfilled, if you have everything you could possibly want, why would you want anything else? So you can almost replace lack. And especially if you get interested in psychoanalysis, if any of your listeners out there get interested in psychoanalysis, anytime you read lack, you can replace it with desire. And anytime you read desire, you can replace it with lack. I think the important thing, especially within the context of an analysis, of a therapy, is that we know that when you do have that experience of lack, like you come into contact maybe with um, the reality that you can't be totally fulfilled, that actually that's kind of the site where growth happens. In a way, maybe it's like clearing a field of weeds and then just waiting and seeing what blossoms.
Yeah. So is that why we chase people who can't give us what we want? What do you
There
think?
might be many reasons that people might do that, right? But I think certainly one is that if we chase people who can't give us the things we want, maybe there's something in the chase for us. right? It's the chase itself. It's that which we could easily call desire, right? We desire people who don't want to give us the time of day, right? We chase people who don't want to give us the time of day. We want to keep that going because that makes us feel vital. That makes us feel alive. For some people, it can kind of become pathological. There's a point at which we do that and actually then cut ourselves off from actually getting what we want. And I'm sure you've worked with plenty of people, right, who they say how badly they want somebody or how hard they try to date and all the apps they go on. And then they have 2-week-long relationships, 2-month-long relationships, and then it immediately gets cut off. So they come in contact with the lack, right? They come in contact with the fact they won't be perfectly fulfilled by this other person. And then they're like, oh shoot, I gotta go do something else here.
Yeah. But in some ways that keeps you that gives you fulfillment, right? The fact that you're always chasing and going and going.
Yeah. But it might give you some fulfillment in a way, right? But it structures what you want. It structures what you end up getting. I think the more that one becomes aware of this, the more they're able to actually make the kinds of decisions in life that bring them something fresh, right? So, for instance, you could only find yourself attracted to bad boys, and you could go through one relationship after the next, having your heart broken, pursuing the same kind of guy, maybe even the same look, who kind of exudes the same sort of qualities, with the belief that you're going to finally one day find the right bad boy and you're going to be complete. And often maybe a lot of therapists would suggest to this kind of patient or client, they would say, okay, well, why don't you try to date nice guys?
Right.
And they say, I can't be attracted to nice guys. They totally don't do it for me, right? But I think with a different kind of approach, maybe with more the psychoanalytic approach, you say, oh, actually, there's some experience of lack in good guys, but actually there's something I'm really cutting myself off from there. There's something I have not symbolized for me. I can't possibly imagine. But in order to break out of this endless, and maybe you're, in your late 30s, early 40s, you're like, I'm so bored of this repetitive pattern. And you become ready for something new.
Yeah. So if I'm into bad boys, what am I missing?
I think that would be up for you to figure out.
I'm just saying. I was just talking about myself. More representing the listeners. Because it's love. It's love about, missing. You're right. It's love really about loving the person, or something missing inside me.
Right. Something missing that can't be ultimately fulfilled in the belief that the other person has got it. But then what happens when we can kind of let go of that a little bit, right? So it might seem like there's nothing left, but it also might pave the way for a completely new experience that we haven't even been able to imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do you help clients imagine that I guess that dark universe that is out there that they haven't been able to get to?
Interesting. I don't know if I really think about it so much that way. I think Lacanians are really strict about not leading people at all. Okay. In fact, Lacanians don't even really make any interpretations. I mean, maybe every so often you might make an interpretation, but even then it's very loose. Lacanian psychoanalysis is like, you might be even laying on the couch. A lot of times you lay on the couch and you look up and it gives you a little kind of sense of freedom. But the best way that I can describe it is it's like we're walking down a beach together, right? And we look over and there's the ocean. And let's say the ocean is the unconscious. It's the unconscious because we have no idea what the heck is underneath that surface of that water, right? It's beautiful things. It's ugly things. It's all down there. And then over to our right, we've got the shore. We've got the houses along the shore. We have where society, where culture is. We have the demands of all that. And we're walking down this beach together. And I just, you're sort of there. You're sort of talking to me. You're kind of sharing whatever you want to speak to. And I might pick down, reach on the ground and pick up some object that washed up from the ocean and say, is this yours? What do you think of this? what do you think of this thing over here? Is this yours? And maybe you say no, and we throw it out, and maybe you say, I don't know, that might be mine.
Right. Like that's meaningful to me,
Yeah,
this one.
yeah,
Okay. All
yeah.
right. What do you think of our culture of quick fixes and self-help, and what do you think about that?
Well, it sells really well, right? Because people want quick fixes. I mean,
Yes.
because it doesn't take. It, I think the problem is it doesn't understand this relationship between desire and lack. So it simply says you're kind of just lacking, and we have the answer. And once you have the answer, you'll feel better. And people do in this very temporary sense.
Mm,
But what they no longer experience if they've been given the answer is necessarily the desire to find something more. So I'm sure you've worked with plenty of people who have a mountain stack of self-help books, right? Because it's not as if you read one and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I'm done with all that. Now life can be perfect, right? It might actually create the desire to read another self-help book and then another self-help book and then another self-help book in order to sustain the cycle. So I think that's just highly exploited in our culture. And look, you don't have to be any kind of scholar or psychologist to see how plainly evident it is. If there was some singular easy ways to help people, well, everybody would just do that. But no, actually, there's this engine of a production of sort of novelty is really what's at play in order to kind of keep us wanting more and wanting more.
yes. Yeah, and the beauty of humanity, right? That we're diverse,
Yeah,
and not everything, not one or five steps is going to work for everybody, and sometimes we're like quick fixes, right? When it comes to even mental health, the physical health, right? That's where
yeah.
there's
I love that you
Mhm.
brought diversity into this equation because I think that's precisely what's at stake here. Because when you offer quick fixes, I think you flatten human experience, right? You turn it into this kind of two-dimensional thing. Of course, the big question is who's doing the flattening? I mean, or who's making the profit,
right.
right? But that's very different than giving somebody the space to simply explore what is meaningful or important to them, right? So then you have the opportunity to really welcome and encourage a more diverse exploration. Um, that's interesting. See, I just made a slip there. I said explanation instead of exploration. So maybe we could follow that a little bit. What would be a diverse explanation? I don't really know, but maybe it's something to do with the fact that right now we're trying to kind of come up with an explanation for why maybe why our industry is headed the way it's headed.
Right. Or what information you're being
Yeah,
given
yeah,
through our phones and social
yeah,
media, and
yeah,
how's that shaping us? What do you
yeah.
think?
Wow. Mm, hmm. I think there's something immensely seductive, of course, about the phone. In one sense, I have an 11-month-old son right now, and um, kind of started to ask this question that a lot of parents have asked questions like, you know, what do we do with regards to phones? And on one hand, I see the consequence. I hear people all the time in the clinic, talking about their sort of a fixation on, using the phone and everything that's done to sort of interpersonal communication and relations and what it's done to politics and God knows
Relationships, yeah.
so on and
Mhm.
so forth.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, maybe what we're kind of doing is like there's this sort of new person, a kind of new human that is coming to being that we don't necessarily have we can't necessarily symbolize yet. We don't necessarily know where this is all going to go. But I think that's a big territory.
Would it be
Yeah,
like the other, like symbolizing,
yeah. I mean,
right?
for sure. Hmm. Hmm. And maybe the ways in which that sort of other flattens out, at least in this context, can really flatten out communication,
Yeah.
right? I think about maybe the problem with texting, right? So you end up missing the little things that make the way that you and I are like relating right now really human. The fact that we might make little mistakes, or that we sort of think about maybe how we appear and to each other right now, and if we have
Yeah.
good eye contact or not, right? That all gets severely flattened out when you're communicating with over a phone, and you can go in and you can correct and you can recorrect and you can recorrect. Maybe there's something there about in trying to cultivate that perfect image online, that you're trying to remove any traces of lack. And of
Right.
course, again, you remove any traces of lack, you remove the possibility of desire.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if you had to leave listeners with one insight about themselves, what would it be?
I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint you here, because in good Lacanian fashion, you offer no answer at the end of the session. in fact, you might even cut the session. So when the person says something that they maybe don't understand, like, why did I say that? Or there's something in a dream that doesn't make sense to them, you might actually end the session right on that. And
You're like, session's over.
Yeah. I mean, you're very kind about it. I mean, there is this sort of image of analysts being like cold and harsh, and yeah. I mean, there's definitely, I'm sure, people who have like compressed 8 sessions in 1 hour.
Right.
But no. You do it in a way to highlight the significance of something, and it might not. It's typically not even something the analyst necessarily knows. Right? It's something the analyst doesn't know, and the patient doesn't know either. And so you leave with this sense of kind of wonder, like, what is that? And it keeps the work of the unconscious going between session. It keeps it moving.
Final question: do you go back and explore that the next session?
That's an excellent question. I don't think that the analyst typically doesn't introduce. They're very careful to introduce their ego into the equation in a way that's a big way to think about it. Whenever you're sort of pedantic, or you're doing some psychoeducation, you're trying to teach something, right? That's totally, I'm not knocking it at all. I think that's really important for certain people at certain times. But what it does is you end up kind of just getting the ego of the therapist is always somehow involved in that interplay. And I think the interesting thing about going with the patient's unconscious manifestations is that nobody really knows exactly where it's going to go. But it often goes to someplace incredibly crucial. It goes to some place that is maybe a little bit beyond the patient's like expectations of what they want the analyst to think about them, for instance. It's a way to really explore the depths of the transference.
Okay, well, thank you, Evans, for all this information, and thank you for taking us through the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real.
Louisa, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I welcome me back anytime.
Of course you will. You are. Desire, language, and the unconscious, it's never as simple as it seems. Maybe you're now curious to listen more closely to your own words, but maybe what you don't say might matter most. Whatever it is, I hope you walk away seeing your inner world in a new light. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like, subscribe, or leave a comment down below.